participants will be able to speak when called upon. At this time, I would like to explain the procedure to be followed during the meeting. We have two amendments on the agenda tonight. For each agenda item, city staff will provide a presentation regarding the proposals. Then those wishing to speak in favor and those wishing to speak in opposition will have up to 5 minutes each to present his or her comments. The public hearing will then be closed and the item turned over to the commission for discussion and motion. Prior to speaking, please give your name and address. Remember to speak directly into the microphone as the hearing is recorded for public record. Any handouts you wish to provide should be given to staff. Please do not approach the commission. The next meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission will be Monday, October the 7th, 2024. Public hearing, first council conference room. Individual items, item number 1. Ordinance Amendment 2024-306-UDC.
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for being here tonight. Oh, the other one first. There we go. I'm Jocelyn Murphy, Director of Planning, for the record. So we do have the two ordinances on the agenda tonight, so I'll run through each of these individually, and then we will have the discussion, we'll have the public hearing, and then we do request that you make a recommendation tonight for the City Council. This is scheduled for their meeting on October 3rd. So the first one is one that you requested a few months ago. So the first proposal is to discuss our indoor amusement definition, and then we will also discuss where a CUP is required, where the trigger is around a residential district. So for the definition of indoor amusement, we're just wanting to clarify what is considered an indoor amusement. So as we kind of work through this, usually it's not unusual when you have an amendment or a new ordinance that we're having to tweak it a little bit. So this one, we're just wanting to be clear that an indoor amusement, we took out the words "a privately operated business activity is open to the public," removed about it being an entry fee, because that really doesn't matter, removed the clarification of the game room, and then took about it being rented as a private event center. So again, we're just trying to clean up what an indoor amusement is. So the new definition would be a facility open to the public, provides general commercial amusement within a fully enclosed building. Indoor amusement may include, but not limited to, arcade, axe throwing, or an escape room, but it does not include a dance hall, nightclub, concert hall, card house, or similarly functioning use. So again, just trying to be clear what it is and it is not. So with the conditional use permit, we last year, I guess it was last June, did the amendment where they were, no, this is before last June, but where a conditional use permit is required if you're within 500 feet of an R single-family district. So the single-family is R40 through the R6 districts. And when we were going through some different cases, you did request that we expand that to where conditional use permit would be required when it's within 500 feet of any residential district. So that would expand the trigger to be within 500 feet of multifamily districts and townhouse districts, things that weren't, literally, quote, single family in the ordinance. So once this is approved, then that will trigger. So that would make you, if there are any of these indoor amusement uses, event centers and nightclubs, that will trigger the conditional use permit, and those will go through the rezoning process. So just to clarify, with a new state law that was adopted last September, that requires a notification, a mailed notification to anybody who might be affected and become non-conforming by these uses or by these amendments. So we did send about 1,900 postcards for both this ordinance and for the next card house ordinance. They overlapped in terms of the areas that would be required to be notified, so we did it all together. So we did do our publication in the newspaper. It was over 15 days, which is the requirement, and we did mail those notices about 2 weeks ahead. Normally it's 10 days. We did do a 2-week notice. So again, here we are today, September 30th, for your public hearing, and it would go to the City Council on October 3rd. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I have a few questions.
Sure.
One is, with the revision to indoor amusement, strikes me as broader than what was there before. I mean, I can't think of any examples personally, but I didn't know if this was capturing more than what we're thinking of in terms of the examples given, or is this just trying to clarify what was intended?
It's clarifying. We wanted to make sure that it was clear that we had it as indoor amusements open to the public. We wanted to make sure we retained that. And so the things that we struck out, we didn't feel were particularly useful one way or the other. So it's probably relatively neutral, but it's more of a just clarifying and making sure, because the next proposal is a card house, you wanted to make sure it was clear a card house is not indoor amusement.
Okay, thank you. The second question I had was, I guess similar to what we'll talk about at the card house, but for these uses, event centers, nightclubs, indoor amusement, I have a similar concern about either schools or churches, / religious, groups having the same opportunity for notice for these types of uses. So I would want to see this similarly directed not only at all residential, but church and schools. And I don't know, since you said that the notice went out together, I don't know if that means this is going to trigger more notice required because it wasn't specifically stated here, but it sounds like it was sent to schools and churches because the other one captures that, but I'm not sure that's the case.
Yeah, the notices went to, I didn't bring a map of this one. So anything that was already within 500 feet of an R single-family district already had the conditional use permit requirement. So anything beyond that was 500 feet from an R district that was not single-family, and then basically all the other, in zone C, NCC, or freeway, and then basically for the card house amendment, everything that was zone C, NCC, or freeway, not within that 500-foot area. So to answer your question, probably a lot of schools, churches, and hospitals got picked up, but they may not have, because you might have churches in residential areas, but those would have already been protected. So I don't know if we would have to renotice if we ran an analysis to see if any of those did not fall into those boundaries.
So if our recommendation was to add church and schools to this, what would that mean? Does that mean this gets punted because more notice needs to occur, or?
Well, I would recommend we do it separately if that's what we were going to do. I mean, feel free to chime in, but.
I mean, the amount of analysis staff would have to do to make that determination as to if additional notices were required, which there certainly is a possibility, as Jocelyn identified. And if that were the case, then the most likely outcome would be at having to get postponed to provide the proper notice, and then you would come back again with that change. So that's certainly your prerogative to feel that way and make that recommendation, but it would be a burden on staff to try to figure that out by Thursday.
I just said, isn't churches and schools already protected? I can't remember what
Schools and churches are allowed in any district, so they are not regulated by zoning. So to find those, we'd have to do that by CO, or it'd be almost kind of a manual analysis. Hospitals are not allowed anywhere, so most of them probably did get picked up in this notice. We'd have to go in and look. But so they're protected from the alcohol distance. So whenever we do for on-premise or off-premise consumption, we do that measurement. And for card houses, we are proposing to protect them as well. But they're not protected just as a whole.
But we have the list because they've been noticed for the card houses, right?
Not as schools, churches, and hospitals. If they were, however they're listed at the appraisal district is how they were picked up.
I'm confused. Are we wanting to add schools and churches, I think, from you, just to get clarification? You're wanting to add it like you would in our district, right?
Yeah, that's what we're
if they
talking
were
about.
close to it, not necessarily, he's wanting to add it within, like, including single-family, duplex, triplex, homes, et cetera, multifamily apartments, including churches and schools. That's what he's wanting to add to the bottom. That would trigger all kinds of notices?
It could. It could.
I thought the card room included, did I misread that? I thought the card room
That's what I thought.
proposal included schools and churches.
What the proposal did is we sent it to those districts where a card room or indoor amusement or event center or nightclub could be allowed today. So there was no distance, there was no consideration for church, schools, and hospitals because we were just determining where they allowed today.
Oh,
Yeah, it was CNCC and Freeway is what we noticed. So the protection area
see.
is different than that.
I think.
Because what we're
I
talking
think I
about with this distance is when a CUP would be triggered.
Any other questions?
Johnson, I mentioned to you about an article I read on card houses, and they picked in Dallas 1,000 feet.
So we'll talk about the card houses in just a second.
Right, but I didn't know if maybe, I mean, these things are a little bit similar in terms of heavy use on parking and locations next to houses. Why did we pick 500 feet? Do you know? I know, but why did we pick that? I mean, 500 feet's not all that far.
It's actually pretty far.
Is it pretty far?
Yeah, like if you look at the alcohol's 300 feet. So I started, when I was drafting this, I actually started at 300, and I went to 500 to be that much more protective. That's actually a pretty good distance.
Okay. And these are allowed to have, the CUPs for indoor amusement is allowed to serve alcohol as long as it gets approved.
Through an RAB.
Right. And it is not it's not a 24-hour business. These
No,
would
well,
not be
so
24.
if they're serving alcohol, then TABC has the hour limitations.
Okay.
Question for you. Now, sorry.
So that's all right. My last question would be, we did an ordinance on hookah lounges. How do those fit into
That's a good question.
CUPs?
So if hookah lounges, you may have to help me, Carolyn, it's kind of, between the hookah lounges and the smoking and the alcohol and all that kind of stuff, it got kind of messy. So hookah lounges, you can't serve alcohol, you can't, so an RAB is a restaurant with alcoholic beverages. You cannot smoke in a restaurant. So therefore, you can't have an alcoholic service in a restaurant. So that's where they went BYOB. So that's where the BYOB ordinance was born. And that tracks the TABC regulations for BYOB, which does have hour requirements and what they can do with that. So hookah lounges, if they're going to have any type of alcohol consumption, it can only be through a BYOB.
But why do we not include them into this conditional use permit process?
We didn't see that. I mean, a lot of the event centers they want to have an alcohol license sometimes, and they want to be able to serve food. We today don't see that as an issue with these types of uses.
And if I'm not mistaken, we're doing the 500 feet from property line to property line, right? Not door to door like we would the
Correct.
300 foot for alcohol.
Correct.
Okay.
So are there any other protections that we can provide for schools, churches, and I guess hospitals? I mean, apart from the 500 feet?
So for schools and churches that are already zoned residential, they're going to have this conditional use permit protection. If they're not zoned from that, they're already in a commercial area. So they have to provide, everybody has to provide adequate parking, there's parking minimums, and so they would already have that commercial to commercial, any buffer requirements, that type of thing.
I guess because in my mind, like, I'm still thinking about the car dealership off of 183 and the church that was behind it. It would fall in this map that we have here. And so is there any protection that we could provide, for example, for that type of, church?
So that one was within 500 feet of single family, so it did trigger that conditional use permit. So that's part of it is,
So there's-
once you trigger that conditional use permit, then we start to have that discussion. Then we send notices, and so instead of adding, additional regulations on top, once you've triggered that conditional use permit, then we can now have discussion of a site-specific, is this the right location for that use? Yeah.
So I guess there's just no way to prohibit it if this business is like behind a church or if it's behind a school.
Yeah, well, this would be triggering the conditional use permit. So we're not trying to prohibit anything, we're just trying to determine when do we need to have an additional level of review from some of these protected uses. That's what we're trying to do.
Hi. Can you go back to the definition? So what would it be for, it says like indoor amusement does not include a dance hall, nightclubs, concert halls. What would that be then?
So those are all separately defined. So like an indoor amusement is allowed in a CN, which is a neighborhood commercial district, but we don't allow dance hall, nightclubs, and concert halls in neighborhood commercial zoning. So are you wanting examples of indoor amusement or what the difference is between those uses?
Well, yeah, I mean, what would it be the samples of indoor amusement and what would they have to do then? I mean, so do we have concert halls and dance halls in Irving?
No, I mean, those were some, like we have Southern Junction. It's kind of, it's a restaurant, but it's been there for so long that it is a dance hall. But in general, we don't have, a lot of dance halls, nightclubs, because we don't allow alcohol sales outside of a restaurant. But these are all, the uses listed here are their own separate uses allowed differently. That's why they're not categorized as indoor amusement. But indoor amusement could be what was it, Meow Wolf. It could be, an arcade. It could be at the axe throwing. There's a lot of neat, different types of indoor amusement, just games and things like that, that would fall under this category. So it's a place that isn't intended to particularly have skill. It's just for sheer entertainment.
What about I don't know if I'm missing it, but what about an event center?
An event center like a rental hall?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's its own category as well. So that's why so we have indoor amusement, event center, and nightclub. So those are all specific. So those would trigger the conditional use permit all the same.
And those each have specific definitions in the Unified Development Code. They're very clearly identified. The same way a restaurant is defined, so are those different uses. So just making sure that there's a distinction.
Okay. So right now, we're just concerned about the CUP and their definition that we're going to be using for indoor amusement. That's the topic right now?
Yeah, right now, the main thing tonight for this amendment is to expand where a conditional use permit would be required from all our districts, all residential districts. That's basically the crux of this. The cleanup of the indoor amusement isn't as big as just wanting to protect all residential uses.
And you mentioned like if a business falls within this category right now, they will have to go through rezoning process?
No. If it's an existing business, anytime any change is made, they're considered non-conforming or legal non-conforming. So we actually did an analysis, a month or so ago when we started all this to figure out, we actually had 2 staff go through all of the COs in these areas and determine which ones might be indoor music, which ones might be event centers, literally less than a handful. We had very few. But we sent the 1,900 notices to make sure that we were covered because the way the state law is, it triggers making sure if anybody might be made non-conforming, we wanted to make sure that we caught anybody who could be. If there is any of them out there that are existing, they can continue as long as they choose to continue as a legal non-conforming use. When they stop or they change to another use, that's when their non-conforming status ends.
When you say that they changed to another use, does that mean that the current tenant lease expires?
No. No, so if you have, let's just say you have an arcade, you've got a free play or something like that. If they can sell it, they can continue, they can change the COs, it can go from Bill to Bob to Mary, it can go to whoever they want to. But if they change that arcade to a restaurant, then if they want to go back to the indoor amusement, back to an arcade, then the conditional use permit would trigger. So as long as it's continuous use, it can stay in place. But if it switches to illegal use, it can't switch back.
Got it. Thank you.
Is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this item? If so, please step up to the microphone. Having no one stepping up, is there anyone that would like to speak in opposition to this item? If so, please speak. If there are speakers and offer the staff the opportunity to answer any questions. Choose.
Turn your, yeah. There you go, yeah, pull your hand off it, there you go.
All right. I'm close, the item is closed to the floor and returned to the commissioners for discussion. We've had that. And so I'm going to give the 1 minute warning to IT here. We're coming up on a vote.
But you're fine, yeah, you're fine.
Okay. I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve sending 2024-306 UDC to City Council for October 3rd meeting for approval.
So moved. Do I have a second?
I'd like to make a comment, though.
Okay.
I mean, I would only vote against this because I would want to amend the motion to include that churches and schools and hospitals be included in this protection. If that means delaying the vote to provide notice, then so be it. So I would want to amend that to this motion.
I believe Commissioner Lightfoot would have to agree to put that in there. Otherwise, if we got a motion, if we have a second on his motion.
I'll move forward with my motion. If we want to change it, we can change it in the future.
Do I hear a second for Commissioner Lightfoot's motion?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Tonight, since we don't have a machine, we're voting by hand. So all in favor, raise your right hand.
There's 6 points. Your other right one, Ricky.
All right. All in opposition?
Yeah, turn on your microphone, please.
Motion passed 5-1.
Thank you. 6-1.
6-1? I didn't vote. 6-1. I was too busy playing with the mic. Going to item number 2, ordinance amendment 2024-307 UDC. Staff, would you make your presentation?
All right, so our next amendment is similar to the one you saw, just creating standards and definitions for card houses. So indoor amusement, as we just discussed, were adopted to distinguish the different types of entertainment, but as we worked with them, card houses, which typically involve a game of poker, operate differently. They have longer hours, they are private member-only clubs, and they typically have higher parking needs. So our amendments, and I'll go through these kind of slowly, and then we can have questions. So we're adding definitions of card house and card game. So card house is an establishment in an enclosed building where card, dice, or other similar games of skill or luck are played for money or anything of value in a private place to which patrons are invited for a fee to purchase a membership, access, or participate in a game, and wherein no person receives any economic benefit other than personal winnings. A card game is a card game including but not limited to poker and variants of poker in which a player places a bet based on cards held by the player, and except for the advantage of skill or luck, the risks of losing and chances of winning are the same for all players participating in the game. So the next definition, or the next amendment is to amend the non-residential land use table in the individual district sections to indicate that the use is allowed by conditional use permit in the CC Community Commercial and the Freeway districts only. So again, we'd be doing the land use table and then each of the individual districts making those changes. In the development standards column in the chart, we would add that a card house is prohibited in any other zoning district. And I want to clarify that the use is not permitted to be, or not proposed to be permitted in the C and neighbored commercial district where indoor amusement is allowed. So for our performance standards, we would add a new section 3.21, or new chapter 3.21, with a purpose and intent section, an applicability for all of the new regulations. We would require that the conditional use permit is adopted for any card house to be operated within a CC Community Commercial or a Freeway district. Card houses would be expressly prohibited in any other district, including those zoned as a detailed site plan, so an SP1, or a generalized site plan SP2, or a restaurant with on-premise consumption of alcohol, RAB. A card house shall be the singular permitted use of any property with an approved CUP for a card house and should not be permitted as an accessory use in any district. So as we talked about a second ago, where some indoor amusements were allowed with an RAB, a card house would not be allowed to have an RAB. So a card house would be a standalone primary use and would not have any accessory uses with it. For maximum size, a card house shall not exceed 1,500 square feet, and that includes all of the backroom type of functions in a card house. Separation requirements, we're proposing the card house would not be located within 500 feet of a public or private school, religious facility, hospital, or any R residential zoned district. Again, this is exactly the same as the RAB for on-premise consumption. But it is larger because we are going 500 feet instead of 300 feet. This does clarify that the distance measurement is from property line to property line, and a card house will not be would not be located within 1,000 feet of a property for which a conditional use permit for a card house has been granted by the City Council. So if there is a CUP for a card house, it could not be within 1,000 feet of those, and so there would be a separation expectation. A card house shall comply with Chapter 47 of the Penal Code. For alcohol, the sale of alcoholic beverages for on-premise consumption would be prohibited, and BYOB venues would comply with the section, or the Chapter 18A for the BYOB standards. And gaming machines, computers, or any electronic means of playing a card game would be prohibited. We would define a ratio for a card house would be 1 to 100 square feet, which is typical for an assembly use. And again, we did publish in the newspaper, we did send about 1,900 mailed notices. Again, it was the same postcard, and this be proposed to go to the City Council on October 3rd. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Jocelyn, can you go back? Yeah, go back to the definition. So when I look at the map, where the CC and the freeway areas, they're still housing areas in some of these areas, especially some of the areas that's in purple.
So the areas in purple would not be housing areas because any residential would not be allowed in these areas. But these are the areas where a card house would be allowed through conditional use permit. So they would have to go through the process in any of these districts.
So are you saying that where purple is at, the freeway is at? 'Cause
Yes, that's the freeway zoning district. So like the purple in the middle is the Walnut Hill Industrial Park primarily. There probably is some, there's some apartments in there. I'm not sure if they are, but if there are, they're not zoned for. They might be the old MFW. I had staff do this just a couple hours ago, but this is what the zoning map brought up.
I was reading the Texas Card House Social Club, which we approved several years ago before we realized that it was a card room of sorts. And they serve alcohol there. And based on a lot of the reviews of that card house, which apparently is incredibly successful and well-liked by poker players, they commend the food and the restaurant, the alcohol, the drinks. So, and a number of people said if you didn't have drinks in these places, they wouldn't go. So are we eliminating alcohol to be served in an effort to restrict card houses from going into these locations? Is that the idea? We want to limit it, or?
It's, the intention is not specifically to limit, it's just not, if you're going to do a card house, that would be the use, and therefore an SP, but for an RAB would not be, a restaurant would not be permitted, because a restaurant is a use and a card house is a use, and we're proposing it, there just to be one use for card house.
So Jocelyn, help me understand how this would work. So on the map, I'm looking at Riverside, and right there at the corner where Royal crosses. And then you've got La Vida down the street there. So the red areas are the CC. So those areas are potential areas, if it was passed, for a card house.
Where they could request one.
Okay. And then in all those white areas is where houses are at.
No, they
Yeah,
could
there is a
be,
school there.
yeah, that they could be any other district, but what the proposal is only in those two districts you could request a conditional use permit.
And then we would look to see where the residentials are at.
Yeah, that'd be part of the consideration, right?
Okay.
So I just a question, since we're on the map. The proposal is these two areas, community commercial freeway, but not neighborhood commercial. And so I have two questions. Why not neighborhood commercial? And if that's not a good fit, then why community commercial? Why don't we just limit it to freeway?
So neighborhood commercial is intended to be the lighter types of commercials closer to residential areas, where you're servicing residential, you know, your beauty shops, your typical cleaners and donut shops, and as they always say. The community commercial, both by category in the future land use map and then by extension, the community commercial zoning district, is more appropriate, as you can kind of tell here, along heavier corridors. It's intended to be more of a regional draw. It's not quite as delicate as a neighborhood commercial. So a neighborhood commercial is supposed to be more protective of the residential areas.
I guess I just don't understand why we restrict and say no alcohol, BYOB. This is meant to be a social club, a private club of some kind, membership only. They know who's coming in and out of there, there's security. Why would we restrict that?
We were trying to just keep the use
To poker,
limited. Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah,
card,
if
to card
that's,
playing.
if that's what they wanted to do, and because of the way you can only have alcohol for on-premise consumption through a restaurant, we didn't want a poker or a card house to be an accessory use. And the way our RAB is set up is the RAB, the restaurant, it's just like when we have hotels. A RAB, the restaurant, is the primary, it just kind of happens to be attached to a hotel. So we didn't want a card house to be an accessory use to a restaurant.
So in other words, places that already have a restaurant and alcohol ability to serve that, they could extend that into a card room, and that's what we're trying to eliminate?
We are not, we want the card room to be the primary use and not be an accessory use to any other type of use.
So Dallas, it sounds like the way they limited it, or the way they were thinking of doing it 6 months ago, I couldn't find what they were doing today, but 6 months ago they said their ordinance was going to be that cards couldn't be the main use, the sole use or the primary use. said it was okay for any of the other games to be, that they'd have to get their revenue from other games, like golf simulation or axe throwing or other amusement, games of skill, I guess I should say. Did we consider that?
They took a different approach than we did.
Yeah, it was very restrictive for sure. I don't know that I have any other questions.
How many card rooms do we have in Irving?
One.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And do we know, is it in a freeway or? It's in the freeway?
It's in a, no, it's in a CC, I believe. Yeah, I think it's a CC base.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'll,
It's MacArthur and 114. Shopping center.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very all
But that, yeah, that shopping center,
So regarding the car, what prompted all this? I mean, since we only have one, what happened that we are going to?
This was a request of the city council.
Okay. Now, regarding the current car house, has there been any issues with the current one? Has there been any?
the police chief says there have been no issues other than shortage of parking. We've asked him several times.
Thank you.
but I mean, I can say I'm personally aware of a lot of complaints, so if, I know there's plenty of people not happy with that house. Not complying with the law and parking.
Any other comments from the commissioners? Is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this item? If not, is there anyone that would like to speak in opposition to this item? Okay, I'm closing the item to the floor and return to the commissioners for discussion.
I had one question. I know, Jocelyn, a couple of months back, we were talking about the distance, how the distance was calculated. And the distance, because we have, subdivisions, and then it's like going all the way around the front door of somebody's house. Is that how the 500 feet is calculated, or is it calculated, a straight shot if you hit one of those subdivisions, which starts the community, that you've hit the 500?
Yeah, we specifically in here, so the second sentence says the measure of calculation shall be in a direct line from the property line of the card house to the property line of the protected use. So
Okay.
we wanted to make sure that we caught that in here.
Yeah.
What you're describing is what the way state law and what we had adopted is for alcohol measurement. If you are a church or a hospital, it's door to door. But if you're a school district property, then it's property line to property line.
Okay, all right.
So we picked up the most restrictive that we have. We wanted to make sure we paralleled that.
Okay.
And so what would it be the minimum, the minimum parking requirement?
It'd be one space per 100 square feet,
And the minimum square footage for the space?
1,500. Oh, I'm sorry, maximum, yeah.
A maximum 1,500 for
Maximum 1,500 square feet.
what was the reasoning behind that?
That was a suggestion of a city council member as we were reviewing this with the council earlier in the month. I think the specific request was 1,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask for a motion at this time.
I just had one more comment.
Oh, excuse me.
I guess when I look at this map, I will say it makes me uncomfortable that there's so much potential space that could be requested, right, for this type of use. Because there are. I mean, I understand the 500-feet radius that is in place to protect the schools and churches. So all I will say is that I just really hope that we have good elected officials, because this map is close to a lot of protected areas. And so I see that. And so I will say is that, I don't know, I feel like there needs to be more protection. But I understand the recommendations that City Council has requested from us, so.
Yeah, I want to be clear, the specific areas where they're permitted was, I don't know this specifically outlined by the council. What you have is a recommendation from the city staff regarding where these would be located, and it's certainly more narrow than indoor commercial amusements or indoor amusements. I would bear in mind that even if you're in a qualified zoning district, you still then would have to be farther than 500 feet away from a residential school or hospital, so it would further restrict, even within those purple and red areas, where it would be permitted. In terms of a recommendation, if the commission wants to further reduce where those would be permitted by eliminating one of these districts, you can certainly pass that as a recommendation to the council, but if I'm not mistaken, we can do that. If you wanted to say, for instance, community commercials, fine, we don't like freeway or something like that, I mean, that's a recommendation you could pass on. But this is, the council had asked staff to look at this and look at a mechanism whereby these requests would be reviewed under a conditional use permit. So that's the general framework that they gave us. They did provide us some specific feedback when we met with them earlier this month, which helped us kind of tailor the ordinance a little bit more. So that's kind of where some of these came from.
I have another question. So cities that do allow this type of recreational use, how many card houses are in their cities? I mean, I know we have one in Irving, but do we have a comparison? I mean, because I know just through P&Z, we've had several come through.
This is a fairly new phenomenon that cities are dealing with. There's complexities regarding overlapping state laws. There's some ambiguity and uncertainty regarding what the state law says, and there's been some recent court cases, but it's a fairly new phenomenon. I don't know that there's another city with a specific use category for this. We're probably on the leading edge of defining a specific use category for this type of use.
If there's no further discussion, I'd like to move ordinance amendment 2024-307 UDC to City Council for recommendation to pass.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Yeah, they don't need a notice for that. They're fine. Turn your microphone on, please.
I have a vote. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed? Your right hand? Okay. Motion passes. What was it? 7-1? I wasn't counting. Who counted?
6-1.
6-1? Okay. Thank you for a good meeting. The meeting is adjourned as of 6:45. Reminder that the next P&Z meeting is Monday, October the 7th.
Thank you.